Johan becoming a very special part of this community. We featured his video last time. We wanted more Johan, so we invited him to come and deliver a TED talk for us, an 18-minute talk. He's an AI enthusiast. He speaks globally at conferences on the fourth industrial revolution and emerging tech. 2019 award winner for Best AI and Robotics Management Consultant by Wealth and Finance magazine. Congratulations on that, Johan. He's a published author, regularly contributes on thought leadership to publications such as Business Day, the Sunday Times, ITWeb. Since I've started following Johan, he is just everywhere. It's unbelievable. He's featured in every magazine, and it's just like, I don't know when you sleep, Johan, but you certainly keep busy. He's the chair of the Special Interest Group on AI and Robotics with the Institute of Information Technology Professionals, of course, of South Africa, where he lives. But of course, we are all global citizens on this call, excuse me. And he does have a day job, by the way, works for PwC South Africa as a lead architect in automation. Johan, you are super welcome today. The stage is yours. We look forward to hearing from you today.
Richard, thank you so much for that. It's nerve-wracking to have that kind of an introduction. Half the time, I think if people really know what I know, they will never invite me to speak at conferences. I'm daunted by how quickly this technology is changing and how much there is to learn. And a few years back, I started speaking to people globally, and I was amazed, and David Wood on this call was one of them, who I reached out to and said, I want to do a recording with you. I want to speak with you. And I was amazed with how many people of esteem and great authors and great speakers are open to speak about this kind of technology and to have these conversations. And I think collectively, we are all learning. It would also be interesting, and I almost want to say a welcome thing, if some of the talks this evening contradict each other, because that's how we learn. So as Richard said, I'm here in Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm very passionate about the future of my country. And as many of you have seen in the news over the last few weeks, there's a lot of things going on that is quite scary. Mass riots, almost a coup. Obviously, our country is beset by high levels of unemployment. Official figures are 34%. They reckon it's most likely closer to 40, even 50% of unemployment. 60% of our population is under 25 and mostly unemployed. So, and I've got a son of 7 years old. So I look at this technology through the lens of what kind of a world will we be leaving for our children. As Richard said, I work for PwC, and if you've ever worked for these big consulting firms, I am almost forced to tell you that I don't speak on their behalf. Otherwise, HR will be on my case tomorrow. So the question of this conference and this webinar this afternoon is, could artificial intelligence be different to other technology waves? And I would say with a resounding yes, it will be. And why is that? Because for the first time in our technological history, the very nature of humanness and even our consciousness will most likely change. We hear about future innovations like the cyber physical world, implants into our bodies. We talk about the biorobotic or the post-human future. I often think that the problem with a lot of these AI conferences is that it's technology only or platforms only. But I think the philosophical and the ethical element of this technology is more important and should be discussed a lot more, the societal impact. This evening, in this very short time that I have, I want to touch very briefly on Schumpeter, Kondratiev. I want to talk about the sixth wave, the so-called sixth wave. I want to talk about this. Are we leading toward a utopian or a good future, better future? Are we leading toward a dystopian or a horrible future? And I think most people, and especially if you look at popular media and especially Hollywood movies, they're all saying that we're moving toward a dystopian future. I personally also am leaning toward that. Maybe I would say I'm in the middle between utopia and dystopian, but I think knowing human nature and how good we are at up, if we don't get this right, we could really allow a future for our children that they would look back on us and say, why did you ever allow this? I recently wrote first of a two-part article series in the Business Day locally. and it's called Hey Dad, It's 2050, and that's by then my son would be 36. First article is about a utopian world where he writes this imaginary letter to me from 2050, talk about how the world's become better, and I'll touch on some of those possibilities toward the end of my talk. The one that's being released on Wednesday next week is the dystopian future, where this imaginary letter of my son is really blaming us as a generation of why did we not rein in this technology? Why did we create this horrible world? And why did we allow it while we still had the power to rein it in? So Schumpeter, as many of you know, was an influential economist in the early 20th century, and he is famous for speaking about creative destruction. The fact that we have to almost allow our current concepts to be destroyed, our current economical structures from within, destroying the old one to create a new one. There's so much more to say about this guy, and I'm skimming over it, but it really assumes his theory that long-standing arrangements and assumptions must be destroyed. And I think that's already happening at the moment in order to make room for new innovation. And I think more so than ever before in our technological history and in our history of innovation, those old assumptions are busy changing, are busy disappearing. And I think we can almost not imagine the world that we will have in 2050 when our children are older. Who knows whether we will still be here anymore. Then the Russian economist Godrietev, who spoke about the long wave cycles, or you'll read about super cycles or great surges or the so-called K waves, these cyclical phenomena in the modern world economy. And just briefly to go through it, and some elements of this touches on the first, second, third, and fourth industrial revolution. And by the way, I personally like speaking more about the smart technology era than the fourth industrial revolution. But we know it was water power and it was steam and rail here in the 1845s, and around the 1900s, electricity and chemicals and the combustion engine. 1950, protochemicals, electronics. 1990s, digital networks, software, biotechnology, and then the so-called sixth wave that we are in now is about automation, robotics, digitization, sustainability, and really the impact that this technology can have on every one of us. I'd really want to do a shout out for a book, and I'm going to actually put it here in the chat. Let me quickly do it. It's a book by Sean Cully called Transition Point. Hang on a second. Now suddenly my computer is opening up all kinds of apps. There we go. There's a, oh my word. I want to do this right because it's really worth reading this book. There we go. And I've spoken to Sean a number of times, and he speaks about these six waves. So his book is Transition Point from Steam to the Singularity, quite a big book to get through. But he talks about the fact that we are now in the sixth wave and how it will impact the transformation of change. And he's basically saying in this book that there will be six main areas that will be impacted through this sixth wave. One is our paradigms, in other words, the way we view the world. The other one is the way we conduct business. Thirdly, our scientific and technological explorations, our economic models, our society, and our very world views. Imagine how worldviews have changed over the centuries, especially from perhaps a religious or a philosophical point of view. I mean, today we look back at certain things in our world that people 100 years ago could never have imagined, or never even have imagined from an ethical point of view. And that's why I say ethics is so important, because we are opening up a can of worms that we've never had to deal with. And an example I often use is, in the 50s and 60s when we had birth control pills. Obviously a massively ethical issue is, are we playing God now? Do we control when we can produce children or not? Today, for most of us, we look at birth control and it's not an issue. But when it started, it suddenly we had to think about things, especially from perhaps a religious and definitely from a philosophical and ethical point of view, that we've never had to think about before. So we are seeing in the next few years things that we've most likely could never have imagined. We could speak, for instance, about implants. So what if an implant in your body could read your thoughts? Are we going into an Orwellian world where we talk about the thought police? Imagine you live in North Korea and you might pay lip service to the dictator, but in your thoughts you think he's a real monster. But now what if that dictatorship could actually read what you're thinking, read your intentions? Imagine what kind of a world that is, and imagine what kind of ethical issues that will open up for us. I think the three main dangers, and I think this is, we'll most likely all agree on, three main dangers we are facing in our world is nuclear war. Even after all the progress we've made over the last 20, 30, 40 years, it seems, and if you read in the news media over the last few weeks, the possibility of nuclear war, especially this technology falling in the hands of rogue states, as it has already happened, or with terrorist groups, it's a real problem. Climate change, I mean, look what's happening in the world, just looking at the news over the last few weeks, what's happening in the US, I mean, Germany and other places. It is, I think we are only seeing the start of what's happening. And then thirdly, obviously, is technological advance, which is the topic of our conversations this evening. I sometimes think that, you know, we are all at a conference where we are speaking about the danger of fire, and a bunch of us are firemen or women. Some of us make the hose pipes that will extinguish the fire and so forth. But while we are philosophizing and doing this kind of armchair conversations about fire, slowly there's smoke seeping in under the door because the building is in fact on fire. And I sometimes think that this is the same when I look at a lot of the conferences that I attend or speak at. Amazing people, amazing thinking. We're talking about a lot of exciting stuff, but the building is on fire. And that's really the message I'm trying to get over whenever I speak to people, is we can't be caught, as it were, to be asleep at the wheel. The world is changing under our feet. Yes, we have to argue and debate, we have to talk, but we have to start having some action. And what that action is, and I think if I just look at the people represented on the call, our various levels and fields of expertise, our various influences, we can make a difference, even if it's a small difference. We can't just rely on government or on business or on academia. It's civil society, it's every one of us. So let's talk about this post-human or biorobotic or cyber-physical world. I want to, before I end, touch briefly on the potential benefits, this utopian world that we could enter, and also this potential dystopian world. So technological utopianism talks about us creating an ideal society and essentially lifting the living standards of pretty much everyone on earth. We talk about laws and governments and social conditions that are solely operating to benefit and to add to the well-being of all its citizens. Some people will talk about a post-scarcity world. So imagine what we can do through technology when it comes to crop yields, for instance, having a lot more food available for most people on earth. We talk about the avoidance of suffering, potentially even the avoidance of death. Technology in this utopian world will reflect the best aspects of humans and of human nature. It will improve our interpersonal communications, our relationships, and our communities. And even the unforeseen impacts of technology would be positive. So just think, even today, what we see is happening in healthcare. I know people who do cancer research using artificial intelligence. They go into rural areas here in South Africa, poor rural areas, with handheld devices to do breast scans, for instance, and through cloud technology and machine learning models can almost give a 100% accurate diagnosis in the field. There are so many examples of what healthcare can do. Think of education, which is a topic close to my heart, the future of how we're going to educate our children. There's a lot to be excited about. But let me touch very briefly on the potential dystopian world that we are creating. And we're talking often about this digital divide. And you know, the country I live in, most people don't have electricity or regular, constant electricity. A lot of people don't have good internet connectivity or any connectivity at all. So this massive digital divide is growing even more and more. People with limited access. In a talk a few weeks back, I spoke about technological apartheid. Apartheid obviously associated with the country I live in, where in those days, because of where you were born and how you looked like, you either had access to really great services and healthcare and the like, and a good economical future, or not at all, which was obviously evil. But we are most likely doing it with technology now through this divide, just because you don't have access to technology and to connectivity. And, you know, I often think, if I look at some of the rural schools here, if children's stomachs are hungry, which happens for a lot of children in our country and in many areas in the world. How can we expect them to learn? So before we jump on our high horses of using machine learning and virtual reality to teach these children, we have to look at the societal impact of what's happening around them. How can we make sure that they have a good diet, that they have access to clean water? For most of us on this call, we can't even identify with it. Years back, I worked extensively in some of our rural areas, and it opened my eyes, because I think, you know, none of us on this call are worried about what we're going to eat tonight. We might not always have budget to go eat out and to have an incredible meal, but I've never in my life gone hungry. I most likely never will. So it's difficult to identify with where most people on earth are. So before, again, back to this building on fire, before we jump on our high horses and get all philosophical, the world that should be impacted by the work we are doing is a world we can most likely not even understand and identify with. So get into those communities, get your hands dirty, get to see how people are living, and then think about not only, as most of us are paid as consultants, to make our customers more profitable and to automate processes and so forth, but how can we also use our expertise to actually change the lives of people, even if it's just a few, because we can't change the world. That we can also, in this dystopian world, see something like the removal of undesirable people. Imagine the Nazis had access to this kind of technology. Just because you're a gypsy or maimed or Jewish or a Freemason back in those days, they killed you. Now imagine what we can do with people who we deem undesirable because they don't have a high enough IQ, or because they're not born in the right kind of family, because we've determined through machine learning that their genetics are not good enough for reproduction. So what do we do then? So imagine again this technology landing in the hands of people like the Nazis who might exist today. Imagine totalitarian governments and nation states using this technology for ill. And something that's already a reality is the weaponization of artificial intelligence. And that's essentially the end of my talk. And I know I'm not leaving you on a high, but on a low. But I think just to summarize, everyone, we have to debate, we have to talk, but we have to start impacting our world somewhere or another. What letter will your children write to you in 2050? And what will they blame us for or thank us for? And on that note, Jaisal, I'm going to hand it back over to you, and let's see if there's a question or two.
Absolutely, and spot on. Thanks so much, Johan. And the talk was so insightful. I think what you have really highlighted is so important, that we have to consider both the aspects of the utopian world and the dystopian world when we talk about technology, especially when technology is so ubiquitous. It is growing at a scale that we cannot imagine. So what is the societal impact that we are having? And what is the impact that our children are going to see? What are the questions that they are going to ask us? Are we asking those right questions to ourselves so that the ethics are completely covered into what we are doing? And is it going to help to even remove the unrequired or unnecessary parts that we are seeing today? So I think what we need to do is all collaboratively need to work together, see the societal impacts, look at the ethical parts that AI is bringing in picture, remove the biases, or mitigate all the risks that you have highlighted by the divide that the technology can bring in. And in order to do that, collaboration is the key. Building the safeguards and all the ethic frameworks are going to help us to do that. I think that will build a better future for our children, definitely. And I'm positive about that. We would do the right thing. Thank you. Thank you so much. I will look at the questions